So I read the biography and I read the introduction in the materials, and it seems that group leadership coaching is the title of this presentation, and I think of a lot of your work. Is that right?
Not completely right. I used to be the pathologist of organization, so I wrote a whole series of books on, actually one book which has been now quite well known in the general management literature is neurotic organization. So I looked at how the relation between personality, leadership style, corporate culture and decision making. So that has been a big stream of my work until probably, and of course I did a lot of also consultation. I work at a very pragmatic school. INSEAD is very closely linked to the business community as opposed to many other business schools, and we are based in 3 continents. It's France, it's Europe actually, a continent, it's Singapore, and it's Abu Dhabi now, it's the Middle East. And so my orientation was somewhat more general in that respect. So around, I think now 12 years ago. In the meantime, I run a seminar since 20 years. It's my CEO recycling seminar, which is not, I take around 21 CEOs, and they stay for over a period of a year. They come 4 times. And so it's not just a superficial kind of seminar. It is very much oriented towards the life case study. And it's in a way a group coaching. It was my laboratory, group coaching effort in a large scale. We started around 8 years ago a program called Coaching and Consulting for Change, which actually dovetailed with a request by the dean to me they had a report from the Boston Consulting Group to give INSEAD, who was supposed to train leaders for the world, to give more focus on leadership. And since I was the one who had written by far most on leadership, I was asked to start that process. So we started something it's called the IGLC, INSEAD Global Leadership Center, which is now, I think, the 2nd largest in the world after CCL. And it is the largest in group coaching, because what I discovered, it's not to be a rocket scientist for that. For example, I would go to Russia regularly and talk to some of my students, are very senior Russian officials. I would walk with them in the snow and talk about the meaning of life and their organization. But then you may go back on automatic pilot because there's nobody to push them back. But if you are in a group, and I do a lot of work with top executive teams, which has to do partially with my philosophy, I like to change organizations, not just a few people. I want to, and you have to go where the power holders are, so I look at the dominant coalition. But if you take a top executive team, and then a team, one person says to us, in kind of bad illustration, I stopped smoking. And the next day he said, give me a cigarette. The other people say, you promised. So what I found with group leadership coaching, there's a bigger chance for oomph. The things happen, as opposed to on a one-to-one basis. I mean, I'm a psychoanalyst in my other life. And so they usually are very long, you spend a lot of time with your patients. But in a way, you can really get certain things done quicker. And so group leadership coaching, and also it has another number of effects. When you have a group of people, particularly when there's a natural working group together, it's a fantastic way to create a boundaryless organization. Also when you have virtual teams, which you have more and more, when you think about investment banks where they have one person, groups, people sitting in Tokyo, Hong Kong, New York, and whatever, and Frankfurt and London. You cannot email a smile or a handshake. You have to be, you have to make an investment up front. Otherwise, paranoia might stay. It's very nice to have teams of clones. You have fast decisions, but it comes at the price of creativity. But if you have highly diverse teams with many different cultures, people have to understand where they come from. So group coaching has now, as I said, we are the largest, I think, in the world. We do it all over the world, particularly, of course, in our hubs. At the same time, this CCC program, which is Consulting and Coaching for Change, which was, it evolved actually when consulting firms came to me, the top strategic consulting firms came to me and asked me, can I help them to make them more effective with their clients and also better in team formation. Some of the most famous ones, I think McKinsey is, for example, very well known for for its seamless global leadership, but they felt it could be better. So I got quite, I felt that maybe there was a market for that. And it was around 8 years ago. I started my center around 10 years ago, and the CEO seminar 20 years ago. So everything came slowly together, because when I started the CCC program, I had an assessment center. So it was a very good way of training coaches and seeing them, consulting coaches, seeing them over a period of a year. It has now, actually, we have since, it took me a lot of time, by the way, it took me 8 years to get a master's degree for the program, because we have a left brain faculty, and so only because the faculty members start to stand in line to be in the program. It's very hard to explain experiential learning, because actually when people take those programs, they have two journeys. One journey is more content driven, but the other journey is it's a form of psychotherapy. Let's be realistic about it. It's underlying this whole thing. And it has been quite a win-win situation to put all those things together, so I'm very pleased with that. I use in my work, and which is inevitable, I think, partially. I'm a psychoanalyst, but I'm not a religious psychoanalyst. I want to stress that, emphasize that. I do anything that works, whatever it might be, paradoxical intervention, appreciative inquiry, motivation, I do anything. But it has, I've introduced the notion I call the clinical paradigm. So, one thing about the clinical paradigm is that we are not necessarily rational individuals. There's a rationale behind it, but the way we behave is not necessarily rational. And a big part of our behavior is unconscious. We are not aware of it. I mean, 90% is it's unconscious. Also, I think we have a tendency to repeat, which was actually striking the conference until now. People don't talk about the transferential relationship between client and coach, and what happens. It's really the transferential relationship is really can use as a vehicle for change. So what the people should realize was good at 50. It's not necessary. What was good at 12 is not good at 50. The parameters have changed. So the influence of your background has an influence on your character and how you behave. So, otherwise, I want for my coaches, which I've trained now a large number, I want them to be aware of the fact when they're out of their depth. And see, when they're in a coaching situation, and because the boundaries, let's face it, between coaching, psychotherapy, consulting sometimes are very vague. Yeah, very fuzzy. They try here to define it, but it's very fuzzy. When I deal with some of my clients, I mean, I have a client who lost $1 billion, a lot of money. And so I get said, how do you lose $1 billion? So then I got quite interested, since I'm also a professor of management, to see what the hell is going on, and try to, and it's careful to at least to try to help him to find the right people to stop that bleeding. I felt in this case I was not the right person to get. I can do it, but it was not my role.
You said something that fascinated me, because I've been watching this in my own coaching practice for years. Many people do not respect their own boundaries and their own limits. I think limits is more the word I want. They don't know that if they hit something that is outside of their frame, that they should go and bring in other help. I'm fascinated that came through what you said. So.
No, it was actually, we did a book recently. I've done a whole stream of books. I mean, over the last 5 years I've done something like 8 books. 8 books, yeah, it became too much. I mean, it was totally, plus all the other things I had to do as director. I resigned as director this year. I felt 10 years enough. I mean, time for somebody else to take over. But the last book is called Tricky Coaching, and I didn't want to be the main author. I felt I had to, I was working on 3 books at the same time. And, so one of my old doctoral students, who's now a professor, is the main author of the book. And I was reading the case studies. It was based on a conference he organized in Berlin, and some of those case studies, I mean, the kind of boundary violations are taking place. It's quite scary, actually. Yeah. I mean, talk about tricky coaching. I mean, it was...
the unconsciousness sometimes of the so-called practitioner, and you see this sometimes in therapy, of where those lines are. And I know there's been a lot of discussion here. Yeah.
No, it's the rescuer fantasy. I wrote a paper recently on the rescuer syndrome, and I think this whole building is full of rescuers, and sometimes you don't rescue anybody, by what you're doing. You basically stop and say, what the hell I'm doing? I keep them in a dependency situation. And so, I've made a strange journey from being the pathologist of organizations, really, with the book, many of those books, neurotic organizations on the couch, the struggling with the demon, I mean, all those irrational executive, all those books. So I was really the pathologist. I depressed people. Then I wrote a funny book called Sex, Money, Happiness and Death. And it's not so funny because when I listen to the stories, which I do, I mean, I felt, that the speaker was not really talking about stories, because the stories we have is really almost a Campbellian thing of, the hero, the heroine is slaying the dragon, has a helper on the way, a coach, and then gets a pot of gold, and the prince or the princess, that's a typical story. I didn't hear that. I think that some of those, coming back again to the relationship of the coach and the client, and the importance of that relationship, and how you manage that relationship, and how you can see when you're also trespassing, the element of that you become too much of a rescuer, that people really, and they have to be aware of their own personality, and how aware are they, and the need for continuous supervision. I mean, even at my age, I mean, I still, to be able also we are in many ways coaches, but they're not always that good at it. I think psychoanalysts are better in that, are keepers of secrets. There are a lot of secrets, and how to keep those secrets. So supervision has always been a way of getting some of the secrets on the table and say, I'm the only one struggling with those secrets. And of course, with group coaching, I remember a number of people I've talked to when you talk about group coaching, and he said, scared the hell out of me. I said, why? And of course, you have the group dynamics. I'm just coming out, it's not out yet, I've not seen it yet, a book called The Hedgehog Effect, which is a parable on not Isaiah Berlin about the distinction between hedgehogs and foxes, which came in Good to Great if you read that book. But this is Schopenhauer, who talked about the two hedgehogs in the winter and getting closer, and then you can only get so close before you sting each other. So it's really a metaphor of the human condition. And when you are in a group, the problem is you have always what I have called there cloud dynamics. There are issues floating around which go beyond the diet, whatever. And so and that is the most difficult thing to do in group coaching. How to what I do it when things get stuck, really stuck. How to keep the group moving and try to address those issues. You can be very wrong.
Very, very tricky.
Yeah.
What was the bridge for you from psychoanalyst to management?
Now I started as an economist. I have a doctorate in economics, and then I went to Harvard, and I got actually intrigued by one professor there, Selesnik, who was a professor actually of production management originally, I think, and got in training at the Boston Psychoanalytic, and those days, quite he was not a medical doctor, so he couldn't become a full member. So I was intrigued by that, and when I came to Harvard, there was a course called Psychoanalytic Psychology and Management Theory, and I said, this is nuts, because but I was fascinated. Perhaps also coming from another culture, and suddenly coming to a very different environment, and so it's there's a dream process. And when you read stories of Freud, like the Wolf Man, the Red Man, the psychotic Dr. Schreber, so there's something else than microeconomics, and let's face it. So so it was a little bit of a role model, and I decided that to really understand that process, I needed psychoanalytic training, and so I became a professor at McGill, and I did my training there, which was actually quite fortunate because I was also accepted to Boston Psychoanalytic, which is a very conservative bastion. But in Canada, it was quite more eclectic. It was much more flexible. And I learned a lot, and then the question was marrying those two streams. I had very little time to write, I remember. I'm a very fast writer, but when I was in training with all the patients, the supervision, and the seminars, plus being a professor there and it was difficult. But then I wrote a book, The Neurotic Organization, with a colleague, and did it in a month, very quickly, because a lot of energy was coming out. And so that was the road I followed. But in the end, it's also, I've written about what I call the authentizotic organization. Authentizotic organization, a word I created. It comes from two Greek words, which is authentikos and zotikos, which means basically organizations where you feel really alive. And many organizations, as you might know, are not happy places. They are gulags. And so one of the things I see as my, talk about meaning, has been to create better organizations and a more civil society also. One of my books actually touches on that, which is a strange book I wrote once called Finding Shaka Zulu in the Attic, Management by Terror, which was really, I wrote in the time of the Saddam Hussein. And so I made a plea in that book for International Criminal Court of Justice, of which America is not a member, which is not very nice, I think, because it has been important to get some of those people who destroy countries, get them in The Hague. Dutch, maybe that's they don't end so. It's not so badly. I mean, you never leave The Hague, but you are treated pretty decently, much better than they ever treated their people. So, and then the question became of. I remember Apple at one point in time coming to me and saying that we are good, but how can we get better? And so that is a very different reframing of it. What can we do to make people better? But my laboratory, and as I said in the beginning, has been my CEO recycling seminar, because you take the life of 20 people and you're responsible for them for a year, and they have a lot of power, because the fantasy on my part was that the 20 people I have this year, maybe they're responsible for 300,000 people. And if you make them somewhat more humane and somewhat more effective, it may have a positive trickle effect to the organization. It might be an illusion, by the way.
Is the group coaching and the CEO recycling seminar, are they running in a similar manner?
And group, of course, the CEO, it's called a challenge of leadership. Okay. Developing your emotional intelligence or something like that.
The recycling word.
Yeah, that's what it really is, because many of those people are, they want to reinvent themselves. I mean, if you have been a CEO for a number of years, for example, you start to wonder, what do I have to give? What is next? What next? The other thing has to do with people who are on the board, executive team, and said, can I do it? I've been a very good number 2 person, but can I be a number 1 person? So there are some of those issues. And group coaching gives them the nudge. And I said already before that it's very good when you have an organization which tends to be very virtual, global, that you really make those investments. It's also very good for creating boundaryless organization, going beyond, turf fights. And also it's very good for knowledge management, because knowledge management is not just setting up a database. It's the ability of people to trust each other, and that's the big thing, because the trust question, how to create trust. And we have lots of misperceptions, because we have a tendency, of course, to think that everybody thinks like us, and people think differently. And and especially when you come from different cultures. I mean, I'm in an institution that has no national identity. We have people from 70 different countries, I think. There are faculty, I think, 40 different countries. And so it makes it quite exciting. I just came from, I was in Singapore. We opened a program there, the CCC program in Singapore, and I was wary, because when you have emerging economies, the psychological side is not the first thing they think of. It's there, but it's not something which they want to be developed further. But it was a very enthusiastic. Actually, we have a waiting list. It was a full. Then I went to Malaysia, which I was working with the civil service, the senior civil servants. Interesting, you think about the power distance is enormous there. They're so driven by status, titles. I mean, what's interesting to how can you, and that becomes also more, how can you change a country? When you talk with those people, because you're just under the minister. So that's exciting, and I find that how to get the best out of people.
Have you had to adjust the program or the way that you teach it for different cultures?
Actually not. When I was the director for Institute Global Leadership Program, Leadership Center, we have around 2,000-3,000 executives passing by. I have around a pool of 70 coaches. Of many of them I've trained myself, and of course we have all these rating systems. Everybody gets rated. Whatever I do, I get rated, and so I would as one of the key indicators, I would look at the ratings for the coaches. On the other hand, there are people who make a very insightful observation, which may at that moment They always say, strike when iron is cold. The iron is not that cold. Yeah, but months later, it might have been the person said, "My God, that was a real good observation. I really learned a lot. It really created a tipping point." So I was not religious, but I would look at patterns, how the variances and things like that. And my fear was, as the director of the center, that a Japanese salaryman suddenly sees the light and becomes psychotic or something like that, something my school cannot deal with. Because there are, a lot of economists, finance professors, marketing professors. But when I think about the 10 years I was director, I think you think about 1 or 2 incidents. When you think about the number of people we have been. I had to go actually also in this process into psychometrics, which is not my bag of tea, so I had to develop, in the beginning I would believe anything people tell me. Not really, but I would listen carefully to it. But when you have the CEOs telling how glorious they are as leaders, how charismatic and stimulating, and then you go to the companies and talk to other people, and you get a very different picture. So I developed something like 5 360 questionnaires, which was really monk work, I felt, but it has to do with my own nature. I mean, what I call sometimes the McDonald's of coaching is the Center for Creative Leadership. I have a lot of respect for them. They do a good job. And in my case, what I wanted for my coaches was more, I have my style. You may see a video of me tomorrow. They made a video. I guess I'm getting older, so they start to make videos of me and give me awards lately. That's maybe they probably expect me to croak any moment, but it's not yet. Not yet. I hope. No,
video technology is better than use it.
No, I died almost twice the last 3 years, so that was a reason for it. William James of being once born and twice born. So my technique of intervention is I'm quite directive. And I can get away with it because of my other head. I can get away with it, but I feel that everybody should work the way they feel most comfortable. But I had to develop some 360 questionnaires to jumpstart the process. So get feedback from your family members. Children's very powerful feedback but of course the traditional one is from the office. The boss, superior, colleagues.
How many would tend to be in a group that you run?
We have discovered that this is not written in stone. But when I assign, I don't do it really. I have an executive director, and I had the new one is actually now here also. 5 is the best for a day. For a day's work, 5.
Okay.
5. That's if you want to work a day with a group of people, 5 is the best. But we have 2 kinds of programs. You have to realize one is the open programs, which like my CEO recycling program, which. People can enroll, but then you have a lot of company-specific programs. Those are people who work in the same organization, which has its own issues. But 5 is the best. But when I do, for example, quite a few of those top executive interventions, we don't really do that so much at INSEAD. I do it in my consulting firm. I was recently in the UK and I had 10 people, which is a big group. But I usually, in that case, when I have a top executive team, I have 2 people. Also, as my CEO recycling, there's two of us, because
2 of you and
yeah.
5 of them.
What?
Two of you.
No, not in this. Not in. No, that's too expensive. We can't afford it. No, but when I do a top management intervention, which is very risky, I do it in 2s. But in general, you can't afford it. It's too expensive. It's too high touch. It's what the French would call bricolage.
And what would the period of time be?
Most of the interventions are very short. And now, of course, what's happening more and more, you get more and more virtual coaching. It's happening. So you have this, the face-to-face situation or the face-to-group situation, and then you have some follow-ups. When people are on the phone or whatever, on Skype, and that's going to happen more and more. I can actually when you think about Whittaker, who's coming here, and his virtual choir, I could even foresee. I've not done it, virtual group coaching. Because think about, I'm going to do something in Australia in a few months. Yeah, one of my old students who became CEO of a very large company. And it's a pain. For me it's a long flight. And time differences and things like that.
So there would be a face-to-face session, and then there would be some follow-up.
Face-to-face, meaning face-to-group session, the group.
Yeah.
Face-to-group session.
Right.
Then what I do when I do it myself, I've learned that, for example, in the CEO seminar, to really create oomph, at least 3 sessions. What I do now, I have 3 sessions with around 2.5 months in between the sessions, and that is it's a week each in a week or 5 days. And then I have half a year later session, which is my built-in alumni session to see, and they have to write certain things in between, give me some progress report. And that's my design for that particular group. But traditionally for the programs we have at INSEAD, it's a day with the group, as such, half a day when you have one-to-one. Some people want to talk about very private things and it's too short to do it in a group, and they often have to do with sexuality, or for example.
They're not going to speak about that in a group.
I don't encourage it either, because it's my experience. It's that it's like children. You show mine, you show yours. That kind of thing. So when other people don't participate, and the other ones feels exposed, the whole issue of shame comes up.
So a group, and then some one-to-one, and
then there's a number of follow-ups, depending on. It's also the client. Clients are not always the smartest, to be honest. Sometimes my old joke of Oscar Wilde was asked, "How's the play?" He said, "The play is a success, but the audience a failure." And sometimes, I guess maybe it's my getting older and cynical about certain things, but I can be quite strong about it. Let's say my experience is that if you don't have 3 iterations, it may not stick. People may relapse, like being alcoholic. So you need to practice and practice. Now the half a year one, which I added something like 6 years ago, which is actually in this case is held in Singapore, it's very useful. They know they come see each other again, and then of course they become a very close network. So they have their alumni sessions every year. Many of the groups, of which of the 20, I think usually 15 survive in that.
Is there interaction between them between the sessions?
Oh yes. They use each other as experts. That's and of course, given that we do it in France, this particular program. You need to find some hubs, which are usually Paris, London. I don't get many US. I get one student. I don't get many US.
Do you know why that is?
What?
Do you know why?
Yes, partially. INSEAD doesn't have a big footprint in. We have a big footprint in Asia. We have a big footprint in Europe, but we have a very small footprint in the market, which is such an enormous market in America. We have so many business schools and whatever. So we don't have that much of a footprint. We try a little bit, I think, but it's not where the growth is actually. The growth, you can see it with our faculty, for example. Our faculty is moving to Singapore. Simpler living, lower taxes. If you're a couple, it's simpler than living in the forest of Fontainebleau. It's not everything in France. It's a beautiful country, but it's also a museum. So,
Yes.
It's.
What do you think is next?
For me?
Yes.
That's a very good question, because normally I've been so manic, to be honest, with all those book projects and all those other projects, and this is my year really for some reflection. You have only so many years in your life, as we all know. It's finite. It's a finite situation, and as I said about this twice born, and to quote William James again, and I get all the time offers to do a book project and things like that, but I have been holding it off because I want to do something maybe a little bit more on a different scale, something different, not just. The element of I'm born in the Second World War, which was not a good scene in an occupied country, and which my mother was quite heroic during that war, and my father too, about. Saving lots of people who were what's called onderduikers in the Dutch language, means you're undercover, and so that has how to create better places to live, apart from better places to work. How to create more civic societies, and there are some serious questions at the moment when you look at all these meltdowns in Europe, America, in Europe, and I think if I can help there, and also the Middle East, of course now. If I can help doing it more, I can do it through, of course, through dealing with politicians and people like that, or ministers or whatever. That's one. So I wonder what can be done. So coaching on a more macro scale to have a real impact and create. That's what of course, the search for meaning. We're all looking for meaning.
Well, it would seem though that the combination of the principles, which is very broad as you describe it, would apply in those situations as just as the same as it does with business people or in other situations. You're going to have to tweak it a little bit, but there's something about the breadth of it that's very compelling.
It is, and the thing, what the paradox is always, is that you have, for example, you have an organization. I was in Mumbai. Organization, there are the 100 most powerful people of the organization there. And they all fall into the helplessness syndrome. We cannot do anything. And look at them and said, listen, if you cannot do it, who is going to do it? Nobody else is going to do it. You know, the famous Pogo cartoon about the enemy is us. And it's lately recently also, when I was in the UK with this executive team, I look at the 10 people and said, listen, you are the power in the organization. If you want things to happen, do it. Nobody else is going to do it for you. That is kind of helplessness fallacy and the waiting for Godot. And if I can, give them some kind of oomph there. Of course, what I very often do is when I deal with a top executive team, I go one step further from just coaching, because I in another iteration talk about, what kind of company do you want to be? What kind of organization? How should it look like? What is your fantasy organization, and how can you get there? So it gets more than beyond just some personal characteristics, how you can be more effective. This really has to do with the team and actually the whole organization. What are the values? You say on your website, those are the values, but can you remember them? Do you remember them? I mean, is it for the shareholders? What are really your values? What makes this company special from the others? So those things become more out. And that, of course, you can also do, as you said, also on a political scale. The politicians in America from a distance, you can believe it. You can believe what's going on there. America has been such an important country to me. My most formative years were here. And I see them fiddling there. Europe, even my heroine, Mrs. Merkel, is screwing up. But you have to see it in context, which has to do with the political situation in Germany and being re-elected. And you have people who are the twice-born types. And life, in a way, I say sometimes, is the intersection of the more. You probably know what it is. There's 3 ladies, more, who are knitting, and spinning your fate. Tishi, which is the goddess of luck. It all seem to be women, and the demon, which is really your character. And so how that all plays out, it's going to be. Last week I got an honorary doctorate in a small country, it's Slovenia, and the other recipient was a man called Ed Shein. Ed Shein, and it was nice. I was being quite influenced by Ed Shein, so he's quite a little bit older than I am, and. He was talking about his career the next day. He gave me and my career, which was very nice to listen to him, and you see all the serendipity. You can of course rationalize it afterwards, but all the chance encounters, getting stuck in Seoul. So he got into brainwashing, it was his work on brainwashing. Starting to teach at MIT and having this kind of coach, Douglas McGregor, theory X and theory Y, and giving a wide scope, but not giving it to him to do it himself. And those kind of chance encounters are really what, and that's important to me too, because when I was, I broke my back, my spine actually, on top of a mountain in Kamchatka, which is probably one of the wildest places in the world. And you realize how many people you have touched as a teacher, and that's one of the. In that respect, I'm extremely happy. I'm a teacher compared to all those.
You see things from a different view, yes.
Yeah, no, it's very enriching, and people come to me and say, "Listen, it was important to me." And this element of another teacher of mine, Erik Erikson, talked about generativity. To be a mentor to the next generation, and so that I do a lot of actually. I'm very proud of the fact that I have developed lots of people, and I can very few of the people are running around here.
Yes, and we thank you very much for that. I thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.